Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven here from Israel. Today is the 12th day of the month of Iyar, 5780, the 6th day of May 2020, 27th day of the counting of the Omer. Broadcasting a day late this week. I apologize. Ran into some serious and very persistent technical difficulties yesterday, which I hope I have met, and that this recording will be clear and successful. So I'm trying once again. Had a few failures yesterday, but let's hope for the best this coming Shabbat. Parshat Omer from Leviticus, chapter 21, verse 1 to chapter 24, verse 23. Before we get into Parshat Omer, this coming Thursday evening, Friday, is Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, that holiday of second chances that first comes up in the desert. We'll be reading about that later in the book of Numbers. The men who go to Moshe and say, we are unclean, we are impure from the contact with the dead, and we're unable to bring the Passover offering. What shall we do? And Moshe seeks the answer. This next Monday evening, Tuesday, is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, Lag BaOmer in Hebrew. And it itself is a holiday, a post-biblical holiday, but it has become a very, very, very popular holiday, especially since Israel has gained its independence and returned to the land God promised. Lag BaOmer has grown and grown and grown. This year, of course, it will be celebrated in a very muted fashion due to the continued corona shutdowns and limitations and protocol in order to best deal with the coronavirus pandemic. I'll just give a quick update about what's going on here in Israel concerning corona, since it's a worldwide issue. Everybody's looking around, I think, and seeing what the rest of the world, how they're dealing with it. In Israel, the numbers of people contracting the disease has diminished significantly, and the people in serious condition has diminished significantly, as well as has the number of people on respirators, and as has the fatalities. So it's all good news. Israel began to open up its public spaces the past 2 weeks gradually. Many stores, many businesses are open. Services are being opened. Even restaurants are being opened. And hotels are being opened. Gyms are being opened. And even barbershops and places that do manicures and pedicures are being opened. Schools are being opened gradually. Not every grade, but slowly. And of course, with all the reopening, there's a lot of new rules for keeping people at a safe distance. And in many cases, these are not so easy to do or to enforce. So there's a lot of responsibility that rests on each and every citizen. Certainly everybody is required to wear masks, and I would like to just emphasize that required to wear masks, not around our necks, ladies and gentlemen, but on our faces to block our mouths and our noses. You do see people who are walking around with a mask around their neck. I don't know exactly what they think they're accomplishing by doing that. But I read something encouraging today. One of the top doctors in Israel who's working with the government to keep the coronavirus under control said that even if 80% of the people wear masks, it's very, very effective. And even if two people are in contact with one another in close proximity, if one's wearing a mask, that may be enough. So hopefully we'll get through this. Of course, they are expecting a potential second wave because of all the loosening up of the lockdown. So it may be that in another week we will see numbers rising again. If they rise too significantly, then we'll be shut down again. And of course, there is always the threat, as there is everywhere else in the world, that there'll be a later breakout of the virus later in the summer, in the winter. And of course, Israel, like every other nation, is working very fervently to try to come up with a vaccination or a medicine that can help. There, as we know, we keep reading about, there have been some things, treatments that have been found to have been very helpful. And hopefully we'll get a breakthrough sooner or later. And God willing, we can put this whole unfortunate episode behind us, but not without a tremendous lesson learned. That lesson being that A, we are only human, that B, it's God who runs the world and not mankind. I think that's a real important lesson for modern man, who tends to think that he's in charge and he makes the rules and he sets the pace, and not really the case. It's been very humbling, I think, for everybody, and we've seen the mightiest nations on earth face the same problems, sometimes less successfully than other nations. So it's also a very clear call that we all are in the same boat. We all are human beings. We all need one another, and it's high time that we all start behaving respectfully toward one another, with a little love and compassion and concern and respect. Remember what we learned last week in last week's Torah reading, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And why should we love our neighbor as ourselves? The rest of that verse, Ani Hashem, I'm God. Okay, that's it. You need another reason? Talk to the Marines, as they used to say once upon a time. You need another reason? I don't know what other reason is. What better reason? God's God. So you should be good to one another. You should love one another. You should love yourself. God created us. Don't forget that. Each and every one of us. And he created each and every one of us with a purpose, with a reason. We may or may not know. We may be on a search in our life to find out. We may be, just along for the ride. But none of us are here by circumstance. We're all here because God placed our soul in our body. So let's make the best of it, and let's be good to one another, and let's get out of this nasty situation with the corona. We had a very serious rainfall yesterday in Israel, a thunder shower, and a heavy rainfall for a short period of time, and then throughout the day and night, more rain fell. And today, in the northern part of Israel, more rain is falling. It may or may not later reach central Israel. This is a late rain for Israel. We actually ceased our daily prayer for rain at the first day of Passover. The rainy season in Israel really commences with the conclusion of Sukkot, actually the 8th day, Shmini Atzeret, to Simchat Torah, the 8th day of Sukkot, or the 8th day festival following Sukkot, where we begin in earnest to mention the rains, and then 2 weeks later to begin to pray every day for rain, and that we do every day, 3 times a day, sometimes 4 times a day, until the first day of Passover. But we're having a late season rain, and we're very happy to have that rain. It's really pushing the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, over the top. And in fact, earlier this week, they opened the floodgates in order to let the water run out from the Kinneret, that is the Sea of Galilee, into the Jordan River. From the Jordan River, it will flow southward into the Dead Sea, where it is also very, very welcome, because, as many of you may know, the Dead Sea has been shrinking for many years now. And we would love to see it fill up again. I don't know that this is going to fill it up again, but it certainly is going to help. So as I started to say, they actually opened the floodgates, the water authorities opened the floodgates a few days ago in anticipation of today's rains, so that we actually won't have flooding around the Kinneret. But in any case, The Kinneret is full. I don't know. Every different report. Some say it's a 6 centimeter below top level. Some say it's 8 centimeter. But in any case, it's filling up more and more. We still have the snows melting from the high peaks on Mount Hermon, the Israel's northernmost border on the Golan Heights, where we had heavy snowfall this year. And as those snows melt, that rain makes its way into the Kinneret, and of course other rivers that go into the Kinneret whose origin is in Lebanon are still flowing very strongly. So the Kinneret is full. We've been very blessed. We were told by the Water Authority this week that for the past 2 consecutive years, the rainfall in Israel has been 120% of the average rainfall. First time that's happened in 2 consecutive years, I think in over 30 years. So we'll take the good with the bad. Corona's not good, but the rains certainly are blessed. In fact, someone was sending around a quote, and it didn't send a source, but a quote from a learned source saying that rain at this time of the year is a blessing that portends health. So let's hope so, and let's all stay healthy. Parshat Omer, as I said earlier, from Leviticus 21:1 to Leviticus 24:23, continues our book-long discussion of holiness, of purity, of sanctity, of welcoming God's presence in the world. We know that with the inauguration of the Tabernacle, that God's presence, His Sheni, filled the Tabernacle. And of course, God's presence is endless. So when we say God's presence filled the Tabernacle, we're talking about a concentration. It's hard to use words because it's really beyond words, but sort of a focus or a focal point of God's presence, certainly where our hearts can turn toward in order to reach out to God, and certainly where God calls upon us to be near His presence in the tabernacle, in the Holy Temple, and even today on the Temple Mount, because the Shekhinah, God's presence, does not leave the Temple Mount. It's God's chosen place. It's really the portal through which God's presence manifests itself on earth. So the book of Leviticus is all about God's holiness and how we make ourselves holy by connecting with God. And we connect with God by doing the mitzvot, the commandments, which, as we've talked about earlier in the year, the word mitzvah, commandment, its root really means litzavot, to connect. These are connecting points. You want to connect with God? We do these mitzvot, and that creates a change in our inner and outer reality, which allows God's holiness, God's presence to fill our bodies and our souls and transform us into beings and carriers and transmitters of God's holiness. You know, these are concepts that we've heard a lot about in terms of the coronavirus. I hate to bring that up again, but it's a parallel. Lahavdil, as we say in Hebrew, with a very different parallel, but it's a parallel just the same. We can become carriers. We can become transmitters of holiness if we make ourselves susceptible to receiving God's holiness, and we do that by all the things we've been learning in Torah, all the mitzvot, whether these mitzvot like keeping the Shabbat, or mitzvot like bringing korbanot, which we are unable to do these days, or mitzvot like not lying, not giving false testimony, or mitzvot like wearing tefillin, or mitzvot like loving your neighbor as yourself. Each and every one is another way to connect and to become receptacles of holiness And there are 613 mitzvot, commandments, in the Torah, and our sages teach us that this is a parallel to the 613 organs and muscles and bones and things that make up our physical being, right? This is why the commandments are physical, yet have a transformative spiritual power in them. And so each commandment, each mitzvah, focuses on a different point. It's almost like acupuncture. It focuses on a different point in our physical being and in our spiritual being. So when we do something that requires our hands to do it, our hands are being imbued with holiness, as is the spiritual aspect of our soul which connects with our hands. It's a very, very beautiful concept, I would say, and it's a very fulfilling, rewarding, and tangible concept when you are involved in performing and fulfilling the mitzvot, the commandments. So the book of Leviticus has been all about that, as the holiness which filled up the tabernacle spreads forth and outward throughout the land of Israel, throughout the communities of Israel, and throughout the world, throughout the children of Israel in the desert, in this particular case. And now the Torah is going to focus on the Kohanim once again, the temple priests, because they are in particular, because of the task that they've been given of performing the avodah, the divine service in the tabernacle / holy temple, they are particular vessels of holiness. So they require a few more mitzvot, a few more commandments, in order to for them to maintain themselves as vessels of this extra. They're not holier than other people, but they have a few more requirements in order to maintain the holiness that they need in order to fulfill their responsibilities in the temple service. So Leviticus chapter 21, verse 1, we'll first start in Hebrew. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe emor el haKohanim bnei Aharon v'amarta aleihem lenefesh lo yitma ba'amav bnei כי אם לשארו הקרוב אליו, לאמו, לאביו, ולבנו, ולביתו, ולאחיו, ולאחותו, הבתולה הקרובה אליו, אשר לא הייתה לאיש, לה יטמא. And that in English is, and Hashem said to Moshe, speak to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, and say to them that none of you defile himself for a dead person among his people, except for his relative, who is close to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, and for his virgin sister who is close to him, who is not yet with a man. For her he shall defile himself. Defile himself means become impure through tamei meta, through contact contact with a dead body, which makes a Kohen tamei, impure, and temporarily unable to perform his task in the Holy Temple. And he's given extra restrictions. This concerns the death of a close family member, what he can do and what he can't do in order to honor the dead, in order to mourn the dead, in order to bury the dead. Certain restrictions given to the Kohanim because of his status in the Holy Temple. And this also extends to who a Kohen can marry. He can marry any of the daughters of Israel from any of the tribes, not just someone from a priestly family, and not just someone from the Levitic tribe of Levi, but from any of the tribes. But she must be a virgin. She must be never married before, must not be a divorcee. And this is, again, in order to protect and ensure the holiness purity of the Kohen himself, and so on and so forth. Then the Parsha goes on to sort of make a parallel statement, again, reviewing something that I said before, but the animals themselves. I'm jumping ahead. It goes on now to talk about the Kohanim, temple priests. They have to be physically unblemished in order to be able to handle the korbanot, the temple offerings. Meaning, if a Kohen, and this is all written out in the Torah verses from this week's Parsha. For example, if a Kohen walks with a limp or has a hunchback or has another physical impairity, is that the word? Or is cross-eyed or even has a broken limb, he is ineligible for dealing with the offerings. Now, he is eligible for other responsibilities in the temple service, and he can perform them for certain. Simply handling of and making offerings, he's unable to do, and that's sort of it's a parallel requirement to the animals themselves, which also have to be unblemished. Every animal has to be inspected before it's slaughtered and after it's slaughtered for internal things that might not have been seen earlier, and they also must be unblemished. So there's a parallel here between those who are making the offering and that being offered. And again, it's another reminder that it is a shituf pu'ula. It's a partnership between the person bringing the offering, the person making the offering, the Kohen, and the offering itself. It's not simply a thoughtless act in which there's a passive third party being offered up. No, it is actually a pact between all the parties. I'm hearing the music. That means first half of Temple Talk has come to a close, but I'll be back in a moment. Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. Yitzhak Reuven still here, and it's still the 12th of ER 5780. It's still the 6th of May 2020, and it's still the 27th day of the counting of the Omer. We've been talking about Parshat Emor, this coming Shabbat's Torah reading, and a few more words about that. And we also want to discuss in this half of the show the second Passover, and also we want to discuss a little bit about Lag BaOmer. So I just want to say this about the continuation of Parshat Emor. After this discussion of the Kohanim, what we've been talking about up till now, the Torah takes it a little further, a little bit different direction. Now it's going to talk about the Moadim. What are the Moadim? They are the appointed holy days. Again, we're talking about holy, but now we're not talking about the personal requirements of the Kohanim, but we're talking about the national holidays, the three pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, as well as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which are all described in this week's Parsha and in other places. And why are we describing them now? Well, it's certainly in the context of holiness, and also, as we're coming to the close, we're getting close to the end of the book of Leviticus, and let's bear in mind that children of Israel have built the Tabernacle They've inaugurated the avodah, the service in the tabernacle. God's presence is with them. Now all I need is to march forward and to get to the land of Israel. So the fact that we're starting to talk about festivals and things that concern life in the land of Israel is very natural, because we're getting ready to go in. And this will continue, this focus will continue throughout the first chapters of the upcoming book of Numbers, of course, until we find that we are waylaid by the sin of the spies, and we'll be spending another 39 years in the desert. But up till now, at this point, Israel is very close to entering. So the fact that the Torah is telling us, and we'll be telling more about the commandments concerning the land in the next few chapters, next few readings of Leviticus, it makes natural, perfect sense. So Torah begins to tell us now about Eleh. We'll start again in chapter 23, verse 1. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amata alehem mo'edei Hashem asher tikra'u otam mikra'ei kodesh elehem mo'adai. And Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Hashem's appointed holy days that you shall designate as holy occasions. These are my appointed holy days." Okay, the word moed, right? We've heard the expression ol moed, which is the tent of meeting. It's usually translated as. Moed is both a meeting in time and space. Here we're talking about the meetings in time and space again. These are the pilgrimage festivals where we all come to Jerusalem, to the Holy Temple, and we bask in God's presence as per His request, aka commandment. And we spend that time in that place with God. And this is what God delights in. And this is the common theme of all the festivals that are enumerated here and that make up the Torah-based holy seasons of the Hebrew calendar. Now, let's read on. I'd like just to read this. I continue a bit. So in verse 3 of chapter 23, we talk about the Shabbat. And then it goes right into the first month, and the 14th day of the month. This is in verse 5. In the afternoon, you shall make an offering, you shall make a Passover offering to Hashem. Okay, and on the 15th day of that month is a festival of unleavened bread to Hashem, matzot, chag matzot. You shall eat unleavened bread for a 7-day period. Okay, on the 15th day of that month is the festival of unleavened bread, matzot, to Hashem. I'd like to point out before we move on that it's very important here. There's a distinction between the 14th and the 15th. The 14th day of the month of Nisan is the day that we bring our Passover offering to the Holy Temple for it to be slaughtered, and then we bring it back to where we're going to be eating it in Jerusalem, and we prepare it in a special way in an oven. It's on a spit in an oven, and it's eaten that night on the 15th at the beginning of the Chag HaMatzot, the beginning of the festival of unleavened bread, which of course is the 7-day Passover, 7-day festival of Passover. But this day preceding Passover, or the eve of Passover, is also a holy day. It's not a holy day in which we're not allowed to work. We need to work on this day. But nevertheless, it's a holy day, and this is really the Chag Pesach. This is really the Passover offering holiday, which unfortunately today we don't have a holy temple, and we are not currently being allowed to build a temporary altar on the Temple Mount in order to bring a Korban Pesach, a Passover offering. So we observe Passover without the offering, which is the centerpiece of the Seder night, and it's the centerpiece of the holiday itself. So it's a big hole. It's a big thing missing, but it is its own separate day. The day of preparation, day of bringing the offering is a huge, huge deal, and we should bear that in mind. The Torah then goes into a few verses later. It says, "And you shall count for yourself u'safartem lechem mimocharat Shabbat miyom aviyachem et Omer hatnufa sheva Shabbatot tmimot yana." And you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day, the Shabbat, from the day you bring the Omer as a way of offering 7 weeks, 7 complete weeks. In Hebrew, Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot. So, here's the question. We're talking about the Passover holiday, and then it says, from the day following the day of rest. You bring the Omer offering, which is the offering of the barley, and then you begin to count 49 days, what's known as Sfirat Omer. And at the conclusion of these 49 days, the day following, the 50th day, is Hag Shavuot, the festival of Shavuot, the day we received the Torah, Mount Sinai. That's the link between Passover and Shavuot. Now, our tradition, the Jewish tradition for thousands and thousands of years, is to begin the count, to make the barley offering, begin the count on the day following the first day of Passover. It is understood from our sages that Mimocharat Shabbat, from the day after the Shabbat, the day of rest being referred to here is Passover itself, because all of the holidays, like Shabbat, are days of rest. We're not allowed to do work on them. And they are mentioned, they are referred to sometimes in Torah Shabbatot, sometimes as a Shabbat Shabbaton. So it is a not uncommon expression when referring to the holidays themselves. Then later in that verse it says Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot, 7 complete Shabbatot. Which again, Shabbat is oftentimes used as well to refer to Shavuot, a week. In fact, in our daily prayer, each morning we say the close to the conclusion of the morning service, we say the Tehillim, the psalm that the Levites sang in that day in the Holy Temple. And each day, there's day 1 of the Shabbat that they sang this, and day 2 of the Shabbat that they sang this. So referring to the weeks as Shabbat is also a common expression. But thousands of years ago, in the land of Israel, the earliest recorded evidence of this split in interpretation is the early days of the Second Temple period, when the Tzdokim and the Prushim had different opinions of when this day, when the counting of the Omer begins, and the Tzdokim, later known in English as the Sadducees, they held that it meant the Shabbat following the first day of Passover, meaning that they would begin the count on Yom Rishon, a Sunday following Shabbat, which meant that it wasn't a fixed calendar day, meaning that depending on the year, Shavuot, which follows the conclusion of the 49-day count, would fall on different days of the month. And the Prushim, later known in English as the Pharisees, who are the forerunners of a rabbinic tradition, which maintained to this day, is that we begin counting the day after the rest day, meaning the first day of Passover. So there's a discrepancy here. The Tzdokim went out of existence in time. Their tradition did not survive, except in the Karaites, a later group, breakaway group of Judaism, who, like the Tzdokim, did not follow the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, which is the source of this understanding that we begin to count on the first day, after the first day of Passover. The oral Torah was received by Moshe on Mount Sinai, along with the written Torah, and anybody who really studies the written Torah understands that without a parallel oral Torah that that can describe and explain and shed light on the written Torah. It's not really a viable covenant with which we can live and fill our days and nights. Even the Shabbat, for example. We're told to keep the Shabbat. We're told to guard the Shabbat. But how do we do it? We're given very few examples in the Torah itself. So from Sinai, we have an oral tradition which has to be taught and has to be transmitted from generation to generation. And this is what keeps the Torah alive, and this is what makes it a living, breathing, life-giving entity. It's essential. This is why the tzdokim, the Sadducees, they perished in time, became extinct, because it just doesn't carry. It just can't make it from generation to generation without this oral Torah, which is the way of understanding and of performing the commandments of the written Torah. Okay, so in fact, there's another tradition that we have evidence of from Beit Yisrael, who are the community of Jews who spent thousands of years, more than 3,000 years in Ethiopia. The ancestors of the Ethiopian Jews, who have now, by and large, Ethiopian Jews live in Israel. They went into exile from the land of Israel during the first temple period. So they carried with them traditions that were very, very, very ancient. And their tradition, until they returned to the land of Israel, was very akin to the tradition of the Prushim, of the Pharisees, in that they agreed that the Mimocharat Shabbat, the day after the Shabbat, referred to the day after the Passover holiday, but they understood it as referring to the day after the seventh day holiday of Passover. As we know, how the Passover has first day and the seventh day are both holy days. And so they would begin their count on the day following the conclusion of Passover, and so that every year their Shavuot would be on the 12th of Sivan, as opposed to the 6th, which is our tradition now. I know that there are people out there, non-Jews, who follow tradition of the tzdokim, of the Sadducees, and that tradition has been adopted by others, and they have their tradition. And sometimes on our Facebook page, we get messages saying, you guys got it all wrong. The real day is this, because it means a discrepancy in the counting of the Omer. You are entitled to follow the tradition that you feel like you want to follow, but I would ask people to not correct the tradition that the nation of Israel has been following for many thousands of years. This is our tradition, and this is what's correct in our eyes, and this is our understanding of what's correct in God's eyes. And you are, like I say, I have respect you if you see it otherwise. That is your choice, your decision, but please don't try to disparage or convince us that we're wrong. Not going to happen, and I would say it's in bad taste. So, what's interesting is that in the times of the Holy Temple, the particular offerings that were brought on Shavuot that pilgrims would bring, since it was a one-day festival, it was very hard to get there in time to bring your offerings. Again, just 49 days before, everybody had to make a supreme effort to get to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount on time to bring their Passover offering, because that had to be offered on that specific day. But here there was a little bit of leniency, and so for 7 days you could bring the Shavuot offerings in the Holy Temple, which meant from the 6th day through the 13th day. Now, what's interesting is whatever opinion anybody had, whatever tradition they had as to when to begin the count of the Omer, the day that your tradition would designate a Shavuot as falling out on would fall within that 7-day period. So I don't know that was the specific intention of the 7-day period. I think it was simply to give a little leeway for the pilgrims, but in effect it provided that catch-all, as it were, for pilgrims going up to the Holy Temple. One last thing I'd like to say about the 3,000 plus year old tradition maintained by the nation of Israel to this day is that this makes by fixing the day as being the day after the first day of Passover, we're fixing the date of Shavuot, and that date of Shavuot is the day of receiving the Torah. The day of receiving the Torah was a specific day. It wasn't maybe this day or that day, as it would be, in effect, if you were following tradition of the day following the first Shabbat, following the first day of Passover, which Passover begins on a Monday or a Wednesday, whatever. Then you have a different date each time for Shavuot. And the 49-day period of counting of the Omer, we understand as a time period for developing ourselves spiritually in order to be able to receive Torah. Just like the generation that left Egypt, they left as slaves. They left due to God's immense loving kindness, who took them out of Egypt, ready or not. And they weren't ready yet. Why didn't they receive Torah the day they left Egypt or the day after? Because they weren't ready. They received Torah 50 days later. That's how long it took for them to mature spiritually to where they could receive, as responsible spiritual adults, receive Torah at Mount Sinai. So if you don't follow the tradition that the counting of the Omer begins immediately after the first day of Passover, then this whole concept of spiritual growth is lost, because it's no longer directly related. It's no longer directly a bridge between Passover and Shavuot, between the physical liberation of leaving Egypt and the spiritual liberation of receiving the Torah. Now, a few minutes we have left. Just like to mention again, this Thursday evening and Friday is Passover, second Passover, Passover Sheni. This is a holiday that first comes up in the book of Numbers, chapter 9, when we're told, again, chapter 9, book of Numbers, it's the beginning of the second year of Israel's stay in Egypt. Stay in the desert. And Hashem says to Moshe, in the Sinai desert, in the second year of their exodus from the land of Egypt, in the first month, Nisan, saying, the children of Israel shall make the Passover offering in its appointed time. On the afternoon of the 14th of this month, you shall make it in its appointed time, and according to all its statutes and all its ordinances, you shall make it. We've read this earlier, exactly the same. This is the date every year. Moshe spoke to the children of Israel, instructing them to make the Passover offering. So they made the Passover offering in the first month, in the afternoon, the 14th day of the month, in the Sinai desert. According to all that Hashem had commanded Moshe, so did the children of Israel do. And then in verse 6, we're told there were men who were ritually unclean because of contact with a dead person, and therefore could not make the Passover offering on that day. So they approached Moshe and Aaron on that day. Okay, they were tamei meit. We know that we have to be pure in order to go up to the Holy Temple, in order to bring our Passover offering. So if we are not pure, but we have become impure, tamei, because of contact with a dead body, then we need to be purified via the ashes of the red heifer. Now these men were in a bind. They didn't have that opportunity, so they were ritually impure and therefore disqualified from bringing a Passover offering. So they said to Moshe, what do we do? They said, we got verse 7, we say, the men said to him, we are ritually unclean. And Moshe said to them, wait, and I will hear what Hashem instructs concerning you. So Moshe goes to Hashem. And Hashem says very clearly, speak to the children of Israel, saying, any person who becomes unclean from contact with the dead or is on a distant journey, whether among you or in future generations, he shall make a Passover offering for Hashem. So from this specific case, we receive a general rule from Hashem that's throughout the generations. They shall not. So basically, in short, you make a second Passover 1 month following the original Passover, and that is the 15th of Nisan. That is this Thursday evening. It's a very simple Passover offering, but it's very important. Sorry, we're running out of time. So much more to talk about, but that's it for today. Thanks for being with me. Temple Talk.